On the rivers of the American Midwest, an invader once cursed for destroying ecosystems and even attacking people has now become a billion-dollar gold mine. Asian carp, from a biological trash species hunted for extermination, has reversed its fate, entered the global value chain, bringing jobs, enormous profits, and even hope for nature's restoration. The outsider that changed the current. No one expected that a fish species quietly imported more than half a century ago could become the crack that opened up a series of questions about resource management, environmental policy, and even economic direction in the United States. In the 1970s, when the catfish and channel catfish farming industry in the American South was booming, the need to treat pond water to reduce algae and organic waste led farm owners to seek a cheap, effective, and seemingly harmless solution: importing Asian carp, hardy, omnivorous fish, famous as living filters, from across the Pacific. That decision was initially just a small footnote in the bigger story of modernizing American agriculture, but it quickly seeped into the river system like an oil slick. After a few major floods, ponds overflowed, and thousands of silver carp, bighead carp, black carp, quietly slipped into the Mississippi River and its tributaries. From then on, they were no longer the pond cleaners for fish farms, but invisible invaders expanding their territory every day, no visa, no permission from anyone. The frightening part lay in their speed and scale of reproduction. While many native fish species take years to mature and spawn seasonally, Asian carp need only a few months to reach large size, and each spawning season a single female can release over 1 million eggs into the water. With no natural predators and no biological barriers, they doubled their population like an endless construction site of production. The story quickly turned more political than biological. Scientists sounded the alarm, but their voices were initially drowned out by the short-term economic benefits of the aquaculture industry. It wasn't until alarming figures appeared, Asian carp biomass, making up to 70% of the total fish population in some stretches of the Illinois River, that the federal government truly rang the alarm bell. This was not only an ecological imbalance, but also a direct threat to other commercial fishing industries tied to the jobs of thousands of fishermen and riverside businesses. But this story goes beyond cold numbers. It also carries shades of cultural and social tragedy. People living along the Mississippi or Illinois rivers not only saw native fish like walleye or bass gradually disappear, but also had to live with a fish that leaps into boats, slamming into people at speeds that could break bones or cause injuries. Many fishing tournaments were canceled, river recreation activities disrupted, and a part of community life tied to the water was thrown into disarray. Faced with this threat, America responded, as it often does, with invisible enemies. Investing heavily in prevention technologies, from underwater electric barriers, biological gates at canals, to large-scale eradication campaigns. Millions of dollars were poured in, but Asian carp seemed to treat it as a challenge to adapt to. They continued to appear in places they had never been before, swimming deeper, farther, and reproducing more vigorously. From an economic-political perspective, this is a textbook example of a difficult equation. A policy seemingly purely technical, importing fish to improve pond water quality, could bring about long-term social and economic consequences that are hard to foresee. The rise of Asian carp was the result of a chain of shortcomings in federal-state coordination, loopholes in laws on exotic species, and a misguided belief that humans can always control nature if they have enough technology and resources. In the years that followed, scientific reports, congressional hearings, and even local newspaper stories turned Asian carp into a symbol of a larger problem. When a nation focuses only on short-term benefits while ignoring ecosystem warnings, the price paid will not only be measured in money, but also in the loss of culture, jobs, and faith in the ability to control the future. That was the very ground where the later story of commercialization and the reversal of fate of this fish species was seeded. A turning point not only for the fishing industry, but also for America's economic environmental mindset. The jumps of panic. If the biological expansion of Asian carp is a silent invasion, then their ability to leap out of the water is a public panic campaign that has forced the entire United States to pay attention. Not many fish species can become the focus of the press simply because of a jump. But the silver carp, one of the most aggressive variants, has managed to do just that. When a loud noise occurs, whether it's the sound of a boat engine or a knock on the hull, they immediately react as if an attack has just exploded underwater. They launch themselves into the air, sometimes higher than a person's head, at speeds of 30 kilometers per hour, and with a mass of 10 to 15 kilograms. Images from Midwestern rivers once made people skeptical. Dozens, even hundreds, of silvery white fish simultaneously shooting out of the water like hail, falling back down with enough force to snap fishing rods, puncture boat canopies, or worse, slam directly into the faces of boaters who couldn't dodge in time. Many people have been injured, from minor scrapes, broken teeth, to head trauma. It's not a comedy movie, but the scene often leaves witnesses both terrified and laughing at its absurdity. A fish species once thought harmless can attack humans in ways no one anticipated. From a social perspective, this is no longer just an ecological matter. It directly affects the safety of riverside communities. Rowing clubs have had to cancel events. Recreational fishing, an industry that generates millions of dollars in tourism revenue each year, has seen a sharp decline in customers due to the lingering fear of being hit in the face by a fish. Even the waterway police in Illinois and Kentucky have had to undergo extra training on how to handle situations when patrol boats pass through hot zones with high silver carp density. From a media standpoint, this phenomenon quickly became material for both journalism and politics. Local TV stations broadcast close-up footage of the carp's frenzied leaps, while state legislators used it as living proof to call for increased budgets to control invasive species. But there's also a downside. The humorous image of the silver carp sometimes makes the public forget the seriousness of the problem. When videos of fish jumping into people's faces go viral on social media, many just see it as a joke, while ecologists see it as a red alert signal about biological pressure on freshwater ecosystems. The deeper cause of this jumping madness lies in the biological mechanisms of the silver carp. As filter feeders, they live near the water's surface, constantly alert to changes in sound and pressure waves. In their native Asian habitats, jumping could help them escape predators. But in American rivers without natural enemies, this reflex becomes excessive behavior, endangering other species and humans. An ecosystem change too quickly has caused the survival instincts of an invasive species to manifest in extreme ways. The impact of this phenomenon also seeps deep into local economies. In riverside towns that depend on tourism, every summer disrupted by jumping fish is a summer of lost revenue. Boat rental companies, fishing gear sellers, and tour operators all have to find preventive measures, from installing nets around boats to changing routes to avoid dense fish zones. But these measures are only temporary and cannot completely eliminate the risk. What's notable is that this very panic-inducing phenomenon accidentally became the catalyst for a later economic turning point. The direct danger to humans forced the government and the media to stop ignoring the problem. These leaps compelled federal lawmakers to act faster, pour in more resources, and open the door to a new way of thinking. Instead of only trying to eradicate them, find ways to turn the threat into a resource. In other words, It was the silver carp's leaps out of the water that pushed the story from the ecological realm to the economic-political negotiating table, where major decisions about future harvesting and exports were formed. And from those shocking leaps, an industry worth billions of dollars began to take shape, opening the next chapter in the journey to reverse the fate of the most hated fish in America. When every campaign fails. After a series of warnings from scientists and images of silver carp attacking people spreading across the media, the U.S. government could no longer sit still. Both the federal government and the states affected launched unprecedented control campaigns, spending tens of millions of dollars from environmental and agricultural budgets. The goal was clear: reduce the density of Asian carp to a safe level, protect native ecosystems, and safeguard the traditional fishing industry. But, as in a recurring scenario in the history of natural resource management, all efforts were quickly defeated by the harsh realities of the river. Electronic barriers were installed underwater, stretching hundreds of meters at key points, once expected to be the fortress wall, preventing the fish from advancing deeper into the Great Lakes system. Yet, just a few months after inauguration, field reports recorded Asian carp appearing on the other side of the barrier. They not only slipped through gaps, but some even took advantage of underwater currents or auxiliary outlets to cross, proof of their astonishing adaptability and resilience. Undeterred, many states launched large-scale eradication fishing campaigns. Hundreds of fishermen were hired to set nets and haul fish day and night, but facing a species with terrifying reproductive power was like trying to bail out the ocean with a bucket. The number of fish caught, though massive, was almost immediately replaced by a new generation. Each mature female dropped millions of eggs into the river each season, rendering any progress fragile. Programs offering cash rewards for people who brought in carp, which at first sounded like a clever solution, also quickly revealed their limits. Not everyone had the equipment, time, and knowledge to catch this species. And more importantly, no one knew what to do with tons of fresh fish without a market to sell them. Government cold storage facilities quickly filled to capacity, while carp left out in the sun became a new environmental sanitation problem. The critical weakness of the entire campaign lay in this: every plan stemmed from the mindset of elimination rather than transformation. While budgets were being drained and public morale eroded, Asian carp continued to dominate the rivers. And it was precisely at the moment that seemed like a dead end that the first bold question arose: if we can't destroy them, why not find a way to make money from them? This idea initially met with skepticism, even fierce opposition. Americans were not accustomed to eating carp, especially a fish associated with pollution and invasion. Even conservationists feared that commercialization might encourage farming, inadvertently aiding the spread of the species. But between prolonged failure and the possibility of opening up a new source of income, some localities, especially Kentucky, decided to try. The first step was quite simple. Instead of destroying the carp, they would be cold stored and exported to markets where Asian carp were a familiar food. The Asian market immediately emerged as a prime choice. In China, Vietnam, and Thailand, this type of fish was not only consumed daily, but also considered nutritious. When a Chinese food company offered to buy entire containers on the condition that the fish be clean, uniform in size, and competitively priced, things began to move. State governments and fisheries associations quickly realized this was a double escape. It reduced ecological pressure while generating income and jobs for river communities. Subsidies for purchasing preservation and packaging equipment were rolled out. Fishermen who had abandoned the trade due to depleted native fish stocks returned to the river, not to hunt bass or walleye this time, but to seek out the very invader that had once caused them hardship. In retrospect, This shift in thinking was like a strategic turning point in a long chess game. Instead of trying to smash the opponent's piece at all costs, America began looking for ways to use that very piece to gain an advantage. And from the foundation of those failures, a new industry was born, not just to deal with Asian carp, but to turn it into part of America's economic ecological story in the 21st century. From enemy to resource. When the first container shipments full of Asian carp left the port of Kentucky, bound for Asian markets, few could have predicted that this would mark the beginning of a chain of profound socio-economic transformations. What was once considered biological waste suddenly became a new resource, and the way Americans viewed it began to change with each shipment exported. Riverside fishermen, who had once turned their backs on the trade, now began reinvesting in larger boats, modern fish finders, and onboard cold storage systems. They realized that every fish caught was not only a source of income, but also a direct contribution to restoring the ecosystem. This rare coincidence, earning a living while protecting the environment, made Asian carp fishing more appealing and sustainable. From a policy perspective, state and federal governments quickly seized the opportunity to establish a legal framework to strictly control commercial activities, avoiding a repeat of the scenario of farming and uncontrolled spread. Strict standards for catching, processing, and packaging were issued, along with the requirement that all fish must be processed or frozen before leaving the invaded river areas. This both protected unaffected areas and enhanced the product's credibility in international markets. Alongside exports, a wave of innovation also unfolded right in the United States. Food companies began experimenting with introducing Asian carp into the domestic menu, but in a completely new form. Instead of selling whole fish, which was hard to win over American palates, they processed it into fillets, fish sausages, or protein powder for the functional food industry. Some high-end restaurants even turned the fish into a specialty dish, combining modern culinary techniques to break the stereotype that invasive fish means bad fish. Notably, the ripple effect extended beyond economics. The shift from eradication to utilization changed the mindset of riverside communities. Previously, Asian carp was a symbol of environmental management failure, a source of conflict between scientists, authorities, and locals. Now, it had become a unifying thread, creating a new symbiotic relationship. The state provided technical and market support, fishermen supplied the raw material, and businesses ensured output and added value. Even universities and research institutes joined in, not only to study the biology and behavior of the fish, but also to improve processing technology, cut costs, and expand products. Some pilot projects succeeded in extracting collagen, omega-3-rich fish oil, and producing animal feed from byproducts. This opened up the prospect of a closed-loop value chain where almost no part of the Asian carp went to waste. Of course, the journey was not without challenges. Export prices fluctuated with international markets, transportation costs rose, and environmental protection pressures remained heavy. But unlike the previous phase, Americans now had a solid economic foundation to maintain and improve control measures. Instead of draining budgets on hopeless campaigns, they were turning the cash flow from Asian carp into a long-term resource for ongoing river protection. From an ecological enemy, Asian carp had become a resource, not because its nature had changed, but because humans had changed their approach. And it is precisely this flexibility that is the key to helping America turn an environmental crisis into an economic success story, while writing a new chapter in the complex relationship between nature and politics. Stepping out to the open sea. Since the first shipments of Asian carp arrived at ports in Asia and Europe, the United States realized it had tapped into a market far larger than initially expected. Not only countries accustomed to eating white-fleshed fish such as China, Vietnam, or Thailand, but even some African and Middle Eastern nations also expressed interest. Asian carp, inexpensive yet rich in protein, became an attractive alternative in the context of soaring global seafood prices caused by climate change and the decline of marine fish stocks. U.S. exporters began shaping long-term strategies, not only selling raw products but aiming to build an international brand. New labels, with names carefully chosen to avoid the term Asian carp, which carries negative connotations, were designed with sophistication, emphasizing environmentally friendly and ecologically sustainable qualities. Instead of simply selling fish, they sold a story that every kilogram purchased was an act of helping protect the Mississippi River ecosystem, a way for global consumers to join the fight against biological invasions. At the political-diplomatic level, the U.S. government saw an opportunity to increase its soft power. Exporting Asian carp not only brought commercial benefits, but was also woven into environmental cooperation agreements, development aid, and food security support. Importing nations not only received fish, but also gained access to processing, preservation, and fisheries management technologies. This was a new form of food diplomacy, where the U.S. both eradicated a domestic ecological threat and built a positive image on the international stage. Meanwhile, the domestic logistics industry also benefited. River ports in the Midwest, which had long been underutilized, now became crucial links in a new supply chain. Cold storage facilities, docks, and container transport systems were upgraded. Many riverside towns witnessed an economic revival as jobs returned, from processing plant workers and truck drivers to technical staff in packaging factories. However, to maintain this advantage, the U.S. had to address two key challenges. The first was ensuring a stable supply. While Asian carp reproduce rapidly, unregulated overfishing could lead to a real risk of supply depletion. Ironically, a once-hated species could become scarce due to trade. The second was maintaining the trust of international markets by guaranteeing consistent quality and transparent traceability. To address this, many states began applying sensor and big data monitoring technologies to track fish movements, forecast seasons, and optimize harvest timing. Cooperative programs between government agencies, fishermen, and research institutes ensured that yields met export demand without disrupting the newly established ecological balance. From a broader perspective, the story of Asian carp has now moved beyond that of a single species. It has become proof of the ability to turn risk into opportunity, to transform an environmental crisis into a development driver. When a neglected resource is brought into the global trade flow, its economic value is measured not only in profit, but also in national reputation, community revival, and political influence. From the quiet waters of the Mississippi River, Asian carp has stepped out to the open sea, carrying the American story, a lesson in adaptability, and the message that in this turbulent world, sometimes the most dangerous enemy can become the strongest ally if we change our perspective. A new legacy on the old river. When container ships loaded with Asian carp leave the docks, leaving behind bustling ports and the hum of processing machines, the people of America's Midwest begin to feel something they never thought possible. A fish once considered a disaster is now reshaping the economic and cultural identity of the entire region. This is not just a story of commerce or the environment, but the birth of a new legacy, a fusion of historical memory and a vision for sustainable development. In river towns that once declined after losing the steel or coal industries, there are now fishing festivals, where fishermen recount the journey from the days of fighting to drive out the invader to the moment it became their main source of income. Small restaurants create new menus, from fish fillet sandwiches to Cajun-style fish soup, turning this sweet white meat into a part of the local culinary life. The change lies not only in the dishes, but in how the community sees itself, from passively enduring change to actively creating and adapting. State and federal governments are not missing the chance to etch this brand into the nation's image. Carefully crafted media campaigns tell the story of Asian carp as proof of the American spirit, turning hardship into opportunity, turning a threat into a driving force. Images of American fishermen on the Mississippi River, smiling under the sunset, have appeared not only in tourist brochures, but also at international conferences on the green economy. From an academic perspective, universities and research institutes see this as a case study to teach about political economy, resource management, and environmental diplomacy. Students learn to analyze a complex ecological problem and find solutions that benefit both humans and nature. Many studies have shown that the model of harvesting and trading Asian carp can be applied to other countries facing invasive species, from tilapia in Africa to golden apple snails in Southeast Asia. However, this legacy is not something that will naturally last forever. Industry pioneers always remind that any success must be maintained with a fragile balance. Managing yields must go hand in hand with environmental protection. Expanding international markets must be tied to maintaining quality. And above all, economic benefits must be fairly distributed to the communities that directly bore the brunt when this fish outbreak began. Looking back on the entire journey, from when Asian carp first escaped from fish farms in the American South to becoming a global commodity, one thing is clear: economic and political power does not lie solely in the hands of corporations or governments, but can begin from humble rivers and ordinary people who know how to transform and connect. Now, standing on the pier, watching ships cut through the waves into the distance, many understand that this story will continue to be told, not only as a memory, but as part of a new identity for America, a legacy not forged from steel or concrete, but from the very ability to adapt, create, and connect people with nature. Asian carp has left its mark not only on the old river, but also in the consciousness of an entire nation. The bell rings, out to the world. From the ports of America's Midwest, the story of Asian carp began to cross national borders. International conferences on climate change and fisheries resource management invited American experts to share the Mississippi lesson: how to turn an invasive species into an economic driver while also improving the ecosystem. For many countries, this is not just an economic environmental model, but also an example of the ability to apply intelligence, policy, and community cooperation to turn the tide. Delegations from Africa, Southeast Asia, and South America came in person, rowing on the river, observing the processes of fishing, processing, and exporting. They witnessed modern production lines that still maintained a community-centered approach, with profits distributed back to fishermen, cooperatives, and conservation programs. More than a few foreign leaders admitted that what impressed them most was not just the revenue, but the way Americans turned an ecological challenge into an opportunity to build national identity. In the international market, American Asian carp quickly gained trust, thanks to consistent quality and a unique brand story. In Europe, it is promoted as a sustainable alternative to overfished marine species. In Japan and South Korea, famous chefs experimented with sashimi and hot pot dishes made from American Asian carp, creating a strong media buzz. Even in China, the species' original homeland, products from America are popular for their guaranteed safety standards and traceable supply chain. But more important than all of this is the impact on thinking. When a species once considered biological trash becomes a symbol of innovation, other countries start to ask, how many opportunities are we wasting, hidden within challenges that seem impossible to solve? From there, the concept of a transformative economy began to be mentioned by many international experts, an economy built on the ability to turn negative factors into positive resources. The United States, as a pioneer, is not only exporting fish, but also exporting knowledge, technology, and management experience. Cooperation agreements have been signed, from providing technical support for safe fishing to building processing plants suited to each country. Non-governmental organizations participate in training local communities, ensuring that success is not only short-term profit, but also long-term sustainable development. However, spreading this model globally still faces many challenges. Differences in law, funding, infrastructure, and most importantly, changing social perceptions. Not every country easily believes that an ecological threat can become an economic opportunity. Yet it is precisely this skepticism that becomes fertile ground for America's real-life stories. Stories that, each time they are told, spark a ray of hope that a crisis is not always the end. And when looking from above at the rivers that connect across borders, one realizes that the story of Asian carp does not belong to America alone. It is a message to the whole world. If we can learn to see with different eyes, we can turn today's invaders into tomorrow's sources of life.